For years, Brian Carter had worked alone in the bowels of the old Harper mine. It was a place of isolation, where the rhythmic clink of his pickaxe was the only companion to the silence that stretched out like an endless chasm. The mine had been his refuge, his sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. For Brian, the darkness and solitude were not to be feared but embraced. Every morning, he would trudge down the narrow tunnels, the only illumination provided by his headlamp. The lamp's beam cut through the blackness, revealing veins of silver and the worn, jagged walls of the mine. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of earth, an aroma that Brian had grown to find comforting. But lately, something had changed. At first, he dismissed it as fatigue or the creeping madness that long solitude might bring. He started seeing fleeting shapes in the corners of his vision, shadows that moved when his light wasn't directly on them. Brian would shake his head and tell himself it was just the play of light and darkness, the trickery of his weary eyes. One evening, as he worked late into the night, Brian noticed something peculiar. A shadow seemed to detach itself from the wall and drift across the tunnel in a manner that defied natural explanation. It wasn't just the trick of the light this time, it was too deliberate, too fluid. "Damn it, Brian," he muttered under his breath, "you're seeing things. You need to get some rest." But sleep eluded him that night, and as he worked the next day, the shadows seemed to be growing bolder. They appeared in the periphery of his vision more frequently, darting around corners and slipping past his line of sight. He tried to ignore them, focusing intently on his work, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One evening, as he was about to pack up and head for home, he heard something. It was a whisper, so faint he could barely make it out. The whisper seemed to echo through the narrow tunnel, a dissonant murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. Brian froze, straining to hear. The whispering came again, clearer this time. "Brian. Brian." He spun around, his headlamp cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was empty, save for the glistening walls of the mine. Brian's heart raced. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice reverberating off the stone walls. No answer came, but the whispers continued, growing in intensity. "Brian. Come closer." Brian's instinct was to retreat, but curiosity held him in place. He took a cautious step forward, the shadows seeming to swirl around him. He peered into the darkness, trying to discern where the voices were coming from. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Show yourself." The shadows around him began to coalesce, taking on vague, indistinct forms. They hovered and danced, their movement almost sentient. "Do you not recognize us?" the shadows asked, their voices intertwining in an eerie chorus. "No." Brian shouted. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" A shadow, more defined than the others, drifted closer. It seemed to take on a more human-like shape, though its features remained obscured. "We were once miners like you," it said, its voice tinged with sorrow. "We worked here long before you, and now, we are bound to this place." Brian's confusion deepened. "Bound? What do you mean? Why are you here?" The shadow's form wavered, as if struggling to retain coherence. "We were trapped. The mine, it collapsed on us. We were left to die in these dark, oppressive depths. And now, we linger here, trapped between worlds." Brian's mind raced as he absorbed this information. "So, you're ghosts? Spirits of those who died here?" "Yes," the shadow replied. "And you, Brian, you've seen the truth of our existence. You're the first to hear our cries." Brian's heart pounded. He glanced around at the shifting shadows, the weight of their collective sorrow pressing down on him. "What do you want me to do?" "Free us," the shadow said, a plea in its voice. "Help us find peace. There is a way to release us from this torment. But it must be done with respect, with understanding." Brian nodded, though he felt a sense of dread. "How? How can I help you?" Find the old entrance, the shadow instructed. The one buried beneath the rubble. It's where we were trapped. If you can clear the debris, we may finally be able to move on. Brian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the task ahead. I'll do it. I promise. Over the following weeks, Brian dedicated himself to uncovering the old entrance. He worked tirelessly, clearing away the rubble that had sealed the mine's old shaft. As he worked, he felt the presence of the shadows guiding him, their whispers encouraging him to press on. Finally, after days of grueling labor, Brian exposed the entrance. A wave of cold air rushed out, and he felt a sense of release in the dark, oppressive mine. The shadows seemed to coalesce one final time, their forms becoming more distinct, more serene. "Thank you, Brian," the lead shadow said softly. "You have freed us." Brian watched as the shadows slowly dissipated, their forms blending into the darkness until they were no more. A profound silence fell over the mine, a silence that felt oddly comforting. With a mixture of relief and sadness, Brian packed up his tools. As he made his way out of the mine for the final time, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had become part of something larger than himself. The old Harper mine, once a place of solitude and darkness, had now become a place of redemption and peace. The outside world seemed brighter and more vibrant as Brian emerged from the mine. He took a deep breath of fresh air and looked back one last time, knowing that the mine's secrets were no longer trapped in the shadows. In the heart of the dense, whispering forest, nestled between ancient oak trees, lay the quiet, unassuming village of Elder Tree. The village had long been a haven for those seeking solitude and a connection to the old ways. Among its residents was 16-year-old Eamon, the last of the Brackens to toil in the family mine, a sacred tradition passed down through generations. The mine, a labyrinth of stone and shadow, was more than just a source of precious ore, it was a bridge to Eamon's ancestors, who had once labored there. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and echoes of a bygone era. Eamon had spent countless hours in the mine, a solitary figure moving rhythmically in the dim light of his lantern. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the mine's entrance, Eamon was hard at work, chiseling away at the stubborn rock. The rhythmic clang of his pickaxe was a comforting sound, a link to the past. But tonight, something felt different. The air was unnaturally still, and an inexplicable chill settled over him. As Eamon worked, a low murmur began to seep through the rock, like whispers carried on a distant wind. He paused, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into faint voices calling his name. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked around, but there was no one in sight. "Eamon." The voices came again, clearer this time, reverberating through the stone walls. The young miner felt a shiver run down his spine. He took a deep breath and tried to shake off the unease. His ancestors had always spoken to him through dreams, but never like this. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing back at him, unanswered. The voices continued, growing more urgent. "Eamon, heed our warning." Panic began to set in. Eamon dropped his pickaxe and leaned against the wall, trying to calm his racing heart. His mind raced back to the old stories his grandmother used to tell, tales of the mine being a living entity, a guardian of secrets and ancient warnings. But he had always dismissed these stories as mere superstition. "Eamon, danger is coming," the voices urged. "We cannot hold it back much longer. You must leave the mine now." Desperate, Eamon grabbed his lantern and scrambled toward the exit. The whispers grew frantic, a cacophony of disembodied voices all pleading with him to escape. The tunnel seemed to twist and stretch in unnatural ways as he hurried through the darkened passageways. His footsteps echoed ominously, and the once familiar paths now felt like a disorienting maze. Just as he reached the mine's entrance, a deep rumble shook the earth. Eamon stumbled, his lantern flickering wildly. He could hear the sound of the mine's walls groaning and shifting, as if protesting his departure. "Get out," the voices cried, a collective roar of desperation. "It's too late for us, but you must survive." Eamon burst into the open air, the cool night wind hitting his face like a slap. He looked back at the mine's entrance, now a dark and foreboding abyss. The ground beneath his feet continued to tremble as if the earth itself was in agony. His legs felt weak, and he sank to his knees, gasping for breath. The voices had fallen silent, leaving only the distant, haunting echoes of their warnings. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for the inevitable. Eamon heard a faint, rhythmic thumping coming from the mine. It was unlike anything he had ever heard before, a sound that seemed to resonate with a deep, primal force. Panic surged through him as he realized that whatever had been disturbed in the mine was not going to be easily contained. A figure appeared in the distance, a silhouette against the moonlit sky. It was the village elder, old and wise, his face etched with lines of worry. He hurried toward Eamon, his steps quick despite his age. "Eamon." "What happened?" the elder demanded, his voice filled with concern. "The mine, Eamon struggled to find the words. "The voices, they warned me of something coming. The mine is shaking, and I don't know what's happening." The elder's face grew grave. "The mine is ancient, older than our village. It holds forces that should not be disturbed. If the voices were warning you, then it means the balance has been upset." Eamon looked back at the mine, its entrance now a menacing dark void. "What do we do?" The elder placed a reassuring hand on Eamon's shoulder. "We must prepare ourselves. The mine's disturbance will attract what was never meant to come into the light. We need to evacuate the village and seek protection." The villagers, drawn by the commotion, gathered around them, their faces reflecting the same fear that Eamon felt. They prepared to leave the village, carrying their most cherished belongings, and made their way to the safety of a distant clearing. As they moved away from Elder Tree, Eamon looked back at the mine one last time. The ground was still trembling, and a deep, otherworldly noise emanated from within. He knew that whatever had been unleashed would be a challenge far beyond their understanding. In the safety of the clearing, the villagers gathered around the elder, who began to recount ancient rituals and prayers to protect them. Eamon, feeling the weight of his ancestors' warnings, knew that the safety of his people now rested on their collective resolve and the strength of their traditions. The village of Elder Tree would never be the same, but Eamon, forever changed by his experience, vowed to honor the warnings of his ancestors. He understood that their voices had been a gift, a dire, urgent call to protect the legacy of his family and the sacred balance of their world. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Eamon stood resolute, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Deep beneath the earth's surface, in a remote mining town named Hartsville, a group of miners discovered a hidden chamber that would change their lives forever. The town, known for its rich history and folklore, had always been shrouded in tales of ancient evils buried far beneath the ground. The miners, however, had dismissed these stories as mere legends. Until now. Jack Lawson, a seasoned miner with a weathered face and a skeptical nature, led the crew. The tunnel had been unyielding for weeks, but today, something was different. An inexplicable breeze wafted through the tunnel, sending shivers down their spines. "Everyone, hold up." Jack's voice echoed through the darkened passage. "There's something strange here." The crew, consisting of Mike, Sarah, and Dave, gathered around Jack. Mike, a burly man with a fondness for practical jokes, squinted into the darkness. "Jack, you're not thinking we've finally hit a gold vein, are you?" Mike chuckled. "Or is this one of your ghost stories?" Jack shook his head. "No joke. It's too cold, and there's a draft coming from this wall. We need to investigate." Sarah, the only woman in the crew and an archaeology student by trade, adjusted her flashlight. "If it's something historical, I'd like to see it. But be careful. We don't know what's behind that wall." Dave, the youngest of the group and a recent recruit, was visibly nervous. "I've heard the old stories, Jack. They say there are things down here we're better off not knowing. Ignoring Dave's concerns, Jack and Mike began to break through the wall. The sound of tools chipping away echoed through the tunnel until finally, a narrow gap appeared. They squeezed through and entered the chamber. The room was vast, illuminated by their headlamps in stark relief against the oppressive darkness. Ancient carvings adorned the walls, depicting grotesque figures and symbols that none of them recognized. In the center of the room lay a stone altar, upon which was an intricately carved box. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "This isn't on any of the old maps." Jack approached the box, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Let's see what's inside. It might be worth a fortune." "No, Jack," Sarah said urgently. "We shouldn't open it. There's something wrong about this place. We need to leave." Mike, eager for adventure, ignored Sarah's warning and helped Jack pry open the box. The lid creaked as it lifted, revealing a dark, shadowy mist that began to seep out. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and a feeling of dread filled the air. "What's happening?" Dave stammered, clutching his flashlight tightly. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber, though the source was unseen. "You dare awaken me?" The mist coalesced into a form, an ancient being with hollow eyes and an aura of malevolence. It hovered above the altar, its presence filling the chamber with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Run!" Sarah screamed. "We need to get out of here." The miners scrambled for the exit, but the chamber seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on them. The malevolent being's laughter echoed around them, a chilling sound that seemed to sap their strength. Jack led the way, pushing through the oppressive darkness. "Stick together. Don't look back." Despite their efforts, the exit seemed to elude them. Despair set in as the chamber's walls pulsated with a sinister energy. Mike, usually so brave, was now visibly shaken. "Jack, we're never going to make it," Mike gasped. "What do we do?" Sarah, clutching a small pendant around her neck, began to chant softly. "I've read about this. There might be a way to banish it. We need to close the box and say a prayer." With trembling hands, Sarah reached into the mist and closed the box. The being's roar of fury shook the chamber. Jack and the others joined Sarah in reciting an ancient prayer, their voices barely audible over the cacophony. Slowly, the mist began to recede, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The chamber's walls returned to their normal, solid state, and the being's presence faded away. The miners found themselves back in the tunnel, the entrance to the chamber sealed behind them. Breathing heavily, Jack turned to his crew. "Is everyone all right?" Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We've survived, but we need to make sure this place remains sealed. There are things down here that should never be disturbed." Dave, still shaken, managed a weak smile. "Next time, let's stick to regular mining. No more ancient evils." The crew, united by their harrowing experience, made their way back to Hartsville. The hidden chamber beneath the earth remained undisturbed, a dark secret buried deep, waiting for someone else to uncover. And as the miners returned to their lives, the shadows in the depths whispered their ancient promises, waiting for the next unwary soul to venture too close.